My name's Dave Wright. I'm the San Diego chapter leader for the PDA-CA PDA-CA, which stands for Progressive Dems of America in the state of California. And also it is the same thing, it's a chapter of PDA, Progressive Dems of America. We have a national and a state organization, and I get to wear two hats. And don't ask me to rub my tummy while I'm doing my two hats. The national organization is a national PAC, and we're basically just a mailing list. We're not a club. We're not a membership-based club. We're a mailing list. And what we do is we give information, give ideas, so that you can take them and take it back to your other organizations and get that spread among. And then also, if you have an issue, you can bring it here, and we can mobilize our mailing list for your, for the things that you need to see mobilized for. Like, say, for example, there's a bill coming up in the state assembly that you need to have pushed. We can get out the word to 45,000 people in the state of California to call their assembly person and talk to them about supporting that bill. So that's where that becomes important. Same thing nationally. We do support a lot of political candidates on the national front. So our national, you will get emails from the national organization saying, please support this congressman who's going up against a very Trumpy congressman in Wisconsin. And that gives us a chance to give them some financial support or make phone calls for them or text banking for them. The value of this comes in very nicely for people like Dr. Richmond, who's running for school board here in San Diego, District D. And we've had quite a few other different people running for office here in San Diego. It's very important to be able to support voices that are trying to be progressive instead of the standard moderate Dems and or the even more right Republicans and even further right Trumpians. So that being said, I'm going to tout it now, but I'll also tout it later. We are on Facebook, so if nothing else, be sure to log in your email address if you've never gotten an email from us, so that we can get you included. But also, what we'd like you to do is go onto the Facebook and like our San Diego chapter PDA-CA page and our regular PDA-CA page. And it has the California bear. Mike, you want to turn your picture off so you can show them what the bear looks like?
Oh, okay. I hope that's what comes up.
I hope so too. There we go. That's our PDA-CA bear. So everybody's had a chance to see it. So yeah. You'll see that as the little picture in the circle, so you can pick out the right PDA-CA. And then, let us know what forums you'd like to see us talk about, because we can put on forums that are going to be of greater interest to you. Because sometimes I'm just bouncing around trying to come up with a good idea, and and it would be great to have some feedback from you all to know what you'd like to talk about, what you'd like to see. That being said, I'm going to turn and give Mike 5 minutes to talk about what's going on in PDA-CA land and also in PDA land.
Well, I'm trying to think. Most people are at home. And what we're doing now is we're putting together an advisory board. And we have become a 501c4, which means that we will legally be able to do lobbying. And that lobbying that we want to legally do, or illegally do, will be in the form of several things. One is we will start doing a letter drop very soon. And what a letter drop is that statewide, we have members in every district in California. If there is some sort of legislation we want people to support from the city level up to the national level, we will write a letter template. And once people are unlocked from their house, they can go to the office of their local legislator, be it a city councilman or an assembly person or a state senator, and drop the letter. And then the plan is to follow it up with a phone call and say, hey, did assembly person whatever get that letter from us, and will he or she support the bill? But as legal lobbyists, which is new for us, it's new for PDA, for national too, we can actually go into an office and do real lobbying if we want to. So it's going to be really interesting in the months to come if we're ever let out of our houses. So that's what we're up to.
Yeah. Thank you, Mike. And then real quick, some of the other things I think that we know that are going on. The George Floyd bill passed in the House of Representatives. The Republicans tried to stage a last-minute flummoxing of it, and they failed. Yay, House of Representatives. And the Senate passed their very weak, we only want to withhold money from police departments that don't decide to bar chokeholds, and so that's what they want to do. They don't want to do very much because to them, Black lives don't matter that much.
I thought that they got defeated in the Senate because they didn't get enough votes to pass it.
They didn't get enough votes? Because,
they did not.
They did not. Okay. I was just listening to one of the commentators on C-SPAN, and they were talking about it, but I wasn't listening close enough apparently. Oh, that's good. And what else is going on? I was at a Juneteenth rally in Balboa Park, and was quoted in the paper. So they didn't talk about PDA-CA, but they did quote me. And so that was a very interesting experience to finally be quoted in the paper, having not had that in a long time about something political. And I would really encourage everybody, if you go to a protest, to seek out the press and speak. If you can get the press to listen to you, speak and let them record you, and then and let them know how you feel, because I'm thinking that everybody here has a practiced voice, because we've been talking about this enough that we actually will sound fairly cohesive and intelligent when we talk to the press. So I encourage everybody to take that moment and talk to the press and bring out your credentials. And that's a good thing. We got about 2 more minutes before I'm going to hand this off to Dr. Richmond and Dr. Jay and Rick. Welcome, Mayor Candidate Rob Howard from Oceanside. Nice to have you with us. And who else is coming on board? Cheryl. Hi, Cheryl. Nice to see you with us.
Hi, you two. I'm going to mute just because I got Peppa Pig in the background here.
That's okay. I have challenges too. My mustache isn't curling enough. So, all right, Dr. Richmond, I guess we can go ahead and kick this football off and get the game started. So without further ado, let me introduce Dr. LaWanna Richmond, Professor Rick Epps, and Dr. Che. from San Diego State University. Dr. Richmond's from UCSD. And Professor Epps is from Imperial Valley College in Imperial County. So, Dr. Richmond, I'll let you get started. Can't hear you. You're still muted.
Welcome to a discussion on 155 years since slavery, what do we do now? I'll start by telling you a little about me. I'm a candidate for San Diego Unified School Board, but I've worked at UC San Diego for the last 15 years, largely looking at how to make sure that it's a great place to work and advocating for my fellow employees and looking at equity and diversity, not just for staff and faculty, but also our students. The last couple of weeks have been really, really hard. Some of it is for the obvious reasons, some of it less obvious, but a big part of it is just becoming so aware of how many people don't really know the history specifically of slavery in our country. There are many people who think that the Civil War was so that slavery could be ended. There are many people who think that the Civil War ended slavery, that the 13th Amendment outlawed slavery, and that everything has been wonderful since then, with the exception of a few civil rights issues that got resolved in the 60s with the March on Washington. And why is everybody so upset? I'm sure I'm speaking to the choir here. You wouldn't be on the mailing list if you didn't have some progressive views. But the thing that I find challenging is the fact that we're all aware that evil flourishes where good people choose to do nothing. We have spent a lot of time laboring under the illusion that it was enough to not be racist, which is a great step, but to not be racist and stand by and not be actively anti-racist allows a lot of evil to flourish. And, there are many people who are really aware of the fact that the issues with the criminal justice system are largely because the criminal justice system was used as a way to de facto continue slavery beginning in the 19th century and continuing on until today. Many of us have goods in our offices where we work or in our homes that are the product of prison slave labor. And I guess you could say it's not slave labor because they get 30 cents an hour or something like that. But it is forced labor. And then when you start to look at the types of behaviors that are criminalized in the communities in terms of representation, before we started the talk, I talked about overrepresentation in COVID infections. But if we look at the statistics, even on who gets pulled over, are you aware that there are people who are in prison because they had a jaywalking ticket that turned into a failure to appear, that turned into a bench warrant, that turned into something else? And then once they got that jaywalking ticket, then they were on, probation or parole? And then they lost all of their rights. And if they did anything close to wrong, then they got more years. And for some people, they become criminalized through that socialization that they experience as they become institutionalized. So I just wanted to start there. I'm sure my co-panelists will have a lot to say. And when we met amongst ourselves, we really talked about this being an interactive discussion. But I do want to close with, for all the people who feel like the protests are too much at this point, they have to remember that the peaceful protest of Colin Kaepernick not only got ignored, it was not quite criminalized. He didn't go to jail for it, but he lost his job. And there are a lot of people who condemn him and consider him un-American because he wants America to live up to its promise.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, Luana, pick someone else to talk.
Oh, I get to pick? Dr. Shea.
Well, thank you. Hello, everyone. And it's a great pleasure to be here today. And, you know, before I actually introduce myself, I just wanted to just kind of add to what Dr. Richmond was saying about peaceful protest and so on. You know, one of the things that continue to pop into my mind is, you know, when we see images of, let's say, people taking, I don't know, even a rack of clothes from Target or toilet papers and so on, you know, I cannot help but think, why are my African-American brothers here in the first place? Because we looted the entire continent of Africa, right? And South America and Southeast Asia, you know, but especially, you know, for my African-American brothers and sisters, yeah, the entire, not only the continent, right, but the culture was looted. Food was looted, everything else. So are we really going to have a conversation that I hear so many people being so scandalized with the idea of, right, looting Target? I mean, that's why I appreciate what Dr. Richmond was saying. You know, we gotta know our history, right? Just a little bit. Just a little bit. We don't even ask much, just a little bit. You know, so I think, and obviously, you know, do I condone those kind of things? Probably not, right? But I think we really have to put it within the perspective of the bigger picture, right? I actually did a lot of, I'm not religious per se, but I learned a lot from my brothers and sisters down in South when I used to go down there quite a bit, to Colombia, to Mexico, to Ecuador, where, you know, it was liberation theology. And, you know, they used to always tell me, please don't ever ask, why are they poor? And he was referring to South America and Africa. He says, please don't ask why they are poor, because he says, then people will come up with 1,000,001 reasons why they're poor. He said, instead, what we must be made poor. You know, when you ask a question in that way, how have they been made poor? Guess what? We are actually pointing the finger at the perpetrators. So poverty just happened.
Uh-oh.
Dr. Shea, we lost you. Well, Rick, how about you jump in?
Okay, I really was getting into what he was about when he was saying just then. It's interesting because it had a lot to do with colonialism and post-colonialism realities. So I hope he comes back soon, because I would love to hear the end of that. Hello, everyone. My name is Rick Epps, and I'm professor of political science now at my later years here at Imperial Valley College, even though I live in San Diego, where I am now. We're online, and I have a house here as well as a house there, so I'm staying where it's cooler as opposed to where it's hotter. It's interesting. You know, I really appreciate both the comments of my colleagues who are co-facilitating this, and you know, it's been a very hectic few weeks, and it's interesting in a dynamic that I've grown. I'm from a native San Diego, and I've seen San Diego struggle. You know, as a matter of fact, when I was a kid growing up here, there was a Parade magazine around 1970 where it said San Diego was the 13th most prejudiced city in the country, and people were just stunned, like, how could that be? And it's interesting as I reflected back on, and even though I was young then, I won't say how young, but I was young enough. But I remember, because all the people who went to war during World War II and, you know, Korea and Vietnam, you know, mostly, you know, people of color and poor whites that went to war, that came from the South. When they came back from the war, they came through San Diego, and a lot of them decided to stay. And so we have a lot of people who came here with ideas from the South, and which was why San Diego was so noted. It was an interesting time. There was so much progressiveness during the 60s and 70s movement, which I thought was really powerful, that but there was also iconic leaders then, such as Martin Luther King or the Cesar Chavez's, or even with the women's movement with Gloria Steinem, that this particular movement is unusual because there isn't a particular leader, and it's taken on a life of its own that I think, while people are terrified. I remember I grew up in La Mesa, and I'll never forget some of my friends who are on Facebook, my high school friends. And at the time, Helix High School, where I went to school, was predominantly white, like almost like 99%, or maybe 95. And I can reading their comments on Facebook about how, oh, poor La Mesa, and oh, our city is, and I'm like, okay, I mean, I get some of that, but I also understand the context. They've been so insulated from the reality of what's taken place. Because I remember when, you couldn't date the white girls, and friends had to pick them up and move them somewhere else or something like that, because we went to an all-white high school. Or I remember being stopped by the cops and being questioned because I had a decent car. My father was a bank vice president, one of the only Black ones in California at the time, back in the day. And so even with all those things, it was interesting how racism was still evident no matter what even if you tried to get ahead, you were still racist. And if you were behind, people were on you. So it was interesting to see that dynamic as it played out through my youth, and even through my years in, through the professional world. I've been a professor. I retired from San Diego State last year after 22 years. And I was also at UCSD for a number of years during that time. And I started doing some work out of Imperial Valley in an area that has great need, 95% Hispanic. And then they made me an offer I couldn't refuse. And so now I'm the president of the Academic Senate. And I am very committed to eradicating a lot of ignorance on this end. And it's interesting, Dr. Christian mentioned earlier about, we have, when people who are called themselves progressive, or those who are very, supportive of these ideas, but take no action, which is really a very big problem in our society. The other side of that is also people who are in struggle, who also carry racist problems as well. When I was growing up, for example, Blacks and Hispanics got along fine. They were brothers and sisters, and they fought that fight through the civil rights movement together. And I can tell you, in the area where I'm at now, there are areas where even amongst Hispanics that do not like Black people. And it's sad to me because I thought we had moved the bar past that. But again, this is the sort of institutionalized, ignorance of people not recognizing that we're all in struggle, and we need to support each other's causes through that struggle. So I'm really excited to be here. I'm excited to discuss some of the realities, and I think Dr. Richmond hit it right on the head with we need to teach history in a different fashion. We've written people of color, Black people, brown people, everybody out of history in this country. And so we homogenize it in a way that it purposely sets up where 5-year-old little kids who don't hate anyone at that point, in a matter of 10 to 12 years, we teach them to hate. Because we teach them that as they grow up from that time going forward, that everything that was done good was done by people who look like them, and everything that wasn't done good was done with people who look like everybody else. And that's one of those things that I think we really, really have to confront in this through this process. So I look forward to the dialogue today, and through my colleagues and through this, that we hopefully will move the bar another inch further down the road and raise some consciousness. So thank you.
All right, Dr. Shea, why don't you wrap up? I'm sorry we lost you. Hopefully we can get the rest of your intro.
No, that's fine. No, you know what? I have prepared something, but you know what? We could do that throughout the day. So throughout the time here, I don't want to just take up all the air and oxygen here. But I am a professor of sociology at San Diego State. I've been teaching at a university for 26 years. And this is part of my area of interest: race, relations, social philosophy, and so on. But I will share just a couple of stories. Mine. One is seems much more innocuous, but that innocuous kind of story kind of leads to what may be happening today. So this happened when I was as a junior in high school in Riverside, California. This was in 1982. I was in a math class, and the teacher had written all kinds of formulas on the board, and she was erasing it. She started erasing. I remember thinking, and I remember saying, her, we called her Miss Z. I said, Miss Z, I'm not finished yet copying all the formulas down. Can you not stop erasing? She was a pretty funny person, and she was actually, a very good teacher, as a matter of fact. But without missing a beat, she didn't even turn around. She says, oh, that's right. She goes, I forgot that with your little beady slanted eyes, you can't see the whole board.
Oh, jeez.
And the entire class fell over, right? And I was a smart ass myself. So I didn't miss a beat. And I said, no, that's not necessarily true. It's not because of my eyes. I can't see the board because of your fat ass. Now, you know what? I apologize. I was only 16 maybe, and I shouldn't have body shamed her. That's sexist. So, but I just didn't know any better. Anyway, the short of the story is I got suspended for a week. And of course, nothing happened to her, right? And I actually had to come back when I got suspended to return to apologize to her, right, profusely. But so then the second story is fast forward a few years, I'm on the College of Berkeley. That's where I got my undergraduate. My older brother was there already. And I still remember like if it happened yesterday. This was April 13th in 1984. My brother's walking home with a buddy of his. And I think most of us remember that during that time in the late 70s, early 80s, there was a real big rise in California of anti-Asian sentiment because of Toyota, Honda, all these cars were being brought in. And the GM factories in Detroit, they were all closing down. So my brother actually just walking home on Telegraph Avenue. If you're familiar with Telegraph Avenue, it's one of the busiest streets in Berkeley, right off the campus. And on Friday night, everybody's there. Even among everybody there, he and a friend got jumped by 8 white kids, and he was stabbed. He went in 6 inches, and while they were stabbing him, they said, stop taking our jobs away, you effing Jap, right? And the next day, there was not even a police report written on this, right? So I say this because in some ways, the president's jokes about Kung Flu, Chinese virus, it's a symbolic wink, right? That violating minorities is okay, and it probably won't even get prosecuted. And obviously there's been a big spike in anti-Asian, right, hate crime since since COVID-19. But I do want to make sure that we understand, this still.
We lost you again.
I think somebody's watching, and every time he gets ready to make a really good point, they fiddle with his internet connection.
While at the same time giving props, right, to the white supremacists and neo-Nazis who terrorized the streets of Charlottesville, Virginia, right? Chanting with the tiki torches lit, you all know this, right? Jews will not replace us, right? The reason why I bring this up is because the kind of culture of hate that Trump spits out has real consequences, right? Because it's a wink. It's a wink to those who murdered Ahmaud Arbery, Philando Castillo, Eric Gardner, Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, Rayshard Brooks, and the list goes on. So while much has changed, many things seem to still be eerily similar since a 14-year-old boy in 1955 in Mississippi named Emmett Till was murdered, right? So for me, 155 years of slavery, what do we do different? I think it is such an important topic, right? And for me, 155 years, I think we have to do, for me especially as an educator, I have to do a better job to let people know that time is not discrete. It's not like yesterday happens, it's gone, and that's it. It's continuous, right? It's how we experience time. So when we say, you know, since 1965, you know, Juneteenth, slavery, quote unquote, ended then, most of the people today is like, that was 150 years ago. What do I have anything to do with that, right? They're so disconnected to especially the younger generation, not the ones who are actually making a lot of these things happening right now, but to many of my 20-year-olds, 30-year-olds, who say to me often, but I had nothing to do with slavery. That was just so far ago, or such a long time ago. And I always tell them, you know what? Yes, if you look at it from 155 years ago, it seems long, but time is always connected. So if we could break that down from by 20 years, you know, you realize 20 years ago, both my parents are alive. 20 years previous to that, both my grandparents are alive, and so on and so forth, right? So it is contiguous. We actually have a connection to 155 years ago because right after that was the Reconstruction for a couple of years, right? 12 years at best and so on. And then Jim Crow kicked in fiercely, right? And then the 1900s happens, and guess what happens? By 1920s, you know, the Great Depression, 1930s, 40s come around, and we have World War I, World War II, and guess what happens? Poor whites, by the millions, which is a great thing, by the way, became middle class overnight through the GI Bill. Yep. Right? Which the GI Bill that African American soldiers had the right to, but could not use, right? Because of the housing restrictions, universities will not let them in, right? Segregation. So if you think about that, and you're like, that was only in the 50s, and then 60s come around with the civil rights movement, and by the time they killed off, right, Black Panther groups, they killed off Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Malcolm X, and so on and so forth, Medgar Evers, and so on. Now you have the 70s all of a sudden with Richard Nixon's war on drugs. And then you follow that up with 80 with Ronald Reagan, with Margaret Thatcher, who just changed the entirety of the world, I think, right? Through their plan on neoliberalism and the way they did. It was, so if you look at it, 1980, and then you have 2000, and all of a sudden, all this time is connected. So it's no longer 150 years ago where I have no connection. It was merely 20 years ago, 30 years ago that my brother was stabbed, right? And I was called about my eyes, right? And so on and so forth. So for me, I feel as though that we do have to do a better job. And like I said, I'm the first one to admit that I don't do a better job. And I got to actually reflect and do better of connecting time so that it's something that doesn't stay in history. We're living it right now. Right? That's all I gotta say for now.
I think Mike Fowler had a question. You gotta unmute. You gotta unmute.
Okay, that's too bad because I usually make fun of people for not doing it. We have a really good group of people here, you know, that are different from the kind of conference calls I've been on lately. And because of that, and because of your experience and knowledge, I have a question, and maybe it's something that we should all discuss. You might notice, those of you with video, that I am a white person. Oh, I'm sorry. Didn't mean to shock you. But I'm also a progressive white person. Mm-hmm. And I can remember 1964, I won't say how old I was, but I was very young. I can remember a lot of movements where people hit the streets, it made the news, people talked about it for 2 or 3 or 4 weeks, and then it kind of faded out. And those of us who were progressives, white or not, took part in the marches and we held our signs. But then we went home, and then a year or two later, something else happened. And lately, that something else has been people have been getting killed. Black people have been getting killed. But it will probably fade out, is my fear. This one seems a little different. Maybe it won't. And my question to you is, what can we do differently? You know, I think our hearts are in the right place, those of us who are progressives.
Yes.
But, you know, we keep doing the same thing. We keep holding those signs. We keep marching. We keep talking about it, and nothing improves. Do you have any insight as to what we can do differently to actually make change? And the we, I think, is all of us.
I think making racism a non-negotiable. Quite often we're asked to compromise and elect candidates who we know are racist because their other policies are good, or you know, yeah, we know that this person has that problem, but they've got all these other good qualities, so we don't need to call them on that, and let's still elevate this person. Because as long as there is no penalty, social, professional, financial, associated with racist behavior, there's no incentive to change it. Starbucks told all of its employees that they could not wear Black Lives Matter gear, paraphernalia to work. There was outrage. Starbucks realized they might lose money. They didn't want to be canceled. So the very next day, less than 24 hours after it became public knowledge that they had taken that position, they changed their position very publicly and actually printed Black Lives Matter's t-shirts for their employees.
May I add something there along with what you're saying, because it's important to make this note with regard to Starbucks. See, this is the problem. Starbucks went, oops, we might lose money, so we'll do this. But that doesn't change their consciousness.
Right.
It doesn't change how they really see this issue. And a lot of the times, because we live in a society that thinks that money is more important than people will focus on the money more than the innate reality of the human being. And we find, and even the progressives and those who call themselves supportive on this side of the issue will capitulate when it comes to money frequently. And that's a huge problem with regard to instituting systemic and institutional changes in this issue, on these issues.
For me, one of the things that I think, and it might not be a quick fix, but it's something that we really need to commit to, is, I think you had mentioned, Mike, that many of us in this group right now are white, progressive. I'm hoping that we actually don't see ourselves, me too, right, as related to Black Lives Matter movement and so on. I don't want to see myself simply as an ally, right? And that's a word that's been thrown around a lot, right? Because ally to me, right, suggests that we are actually severed. We may really not have much in common, except for this common purpose for this issue. And then after that, we may go our separate ways, right? I mean, think about all the allies we had during World War II who are no longer our allies, right? Instead, I think we really need to focus on a new framework that we haven't talked about much in our country, at least, and that's the idea of solidarity, right? And that really means that, you know, it is interesting that you say that, because the two people, with respect to some of the things that are going on right now, if I actually had to bet my life, one of the people would be my academic mentor, who is actually maybe a little bit more whiter than you, Mike, right? So what I'm saying is, it really isn't about, as you all know, it really isn't about color. And we also cannot be, in some ways, afraid to be able to say, hey, I am your brother and sister. Now, you might actually have certain Black people or certain Asian people who say, no, you're not. But guess what? That shouldn't stop you there, because not one Asian or Black person speaks on behalf of everybody else, right? That's one of the things we gotta get away from. Just as there's diversity in white folks, it's the same thing with Asian Americans and African Americans and Latinos. There are, when you look at Trump rallies, I don't know why they're there, but there are Asians there. There are Blacks there. There are my Latino brothers and sisters there. That just breaks my heart, and yet they're there. You know, so I think the idea is that, you know, we really do have to understand the idea of solidarity, and not simply as an ally. So
I want to add something that I've been thinking a lot about as I think about how the school.
I think David had his hand up.
Okay.
Actually, we have a phone caller that has had their hand up for a little bit, so I'm going to lower their hand and unmute them and let them see what they wanted to add.
That's actually it was in error. It's Michelle, and I don't have any control over bringing it back down.
Okay, so thank you, Michelle.
Thanks.
Glad to have you with us. I'm going to put you back on mute and then turn the program back over to Dr. Richmond.
So I was just going to say that the state of California passed a law saying that all school districts were going to have to start having an ethnic studies curriculum. And there's been a lot of people feeling different ways about it. It doesn't go far enough. It's not the quality people want. Why do we force kids to learn this? I posit that we should actually look at how to make history and education, all subjects, be more holistic. Our children are born as global citizens in this world that they live in. And for them to not learn the history or the context of the contributions of non-white people until they take a Latinx studies class or a Black studies class, or not learn the contributions of our LGBTQIA community members until they take a class that's specifically that, actually further it reinforces the differences. When the reality is, when we're learning about math and science, we should learn about where the sources of all these different formulas and theorems, who conducted the experiments. We shouldn't wait until we're in our 30s to find out that Beethoven was Black, or that Alexander Dumas was Black, or any of the contributions that are happening. And I think that if education was less, I'm trying to think of a word other than bleached, if it wasn't so processed and refined and distributed in a way that eliminates or limits the contributions of others. I mean, there's some things that we're ashamed of as a nation, but I think that if we teach people when they're young, they don't have to go through this, oh, I didn't realize, or, you know, and maybe we might have a different experience in our society.
No, it's interesting. You and I spoke about this the other day, and you know, this is, you know, one of the things I was thinking about, what the comments that you were saying had to do with the idea of, you know, at least before, when people were racist, it was overt and in your face, right? And now today it is institutionalized in a way where it happens very subtly, so people don't understand that it's there because it's not as ugly as it was supposedly back in the day. But I'll speak directly to the idea of education regarding how we teach our history, and the idea that like Cal State is talking about doing an ethnic studies requirement, and not that these things aren't good ideas, but I can tell you what happened to UCLA back in the 90s when they tried this. They were going to require basically after Rodney King riots, and I was a program director on campus at UCLA at the time. They were going to require students to have to take either a Latinx class or African studies class, or to try and help bridge this gap. And the students on campus at UCLA got up in arms about the fact that somebody was going to make them take an ethnic studies class. So at the time, I was a liaison to the academic senate, and I'm on all these supposedly brilliant people who were just befuddled as to why in the world, there was such visceral pushback about this issue. And I looked at these people and I said, I'll tell you exactly what the problem is. And then the problem was you made it a thing. Instead of just incorporating history, Black history, brown history, Asian history, you know, people of women's history, the LGBTQ history into the regular history curriculum so that people will get it without having to shove it in their face, that's how you get there. And they all still looked at like befuddled, like, gee, like, oh my gosh, so you're asking our history professors to teach American history from a different modality? Yeah, that's what we're asking, you know, because it is a different modality, because now you're going to, instead of giving the history mythos that we have given, and by the way, I can tell you a lot of students don't like history anymore, but it's also a faction of the reality of how we teach education, because sadly we're shifting very quickly to a nation that is making our the process of learning not as essential as just getting that degree and getting out. So the idea of being able to take in information that requires depth, which is what it takes to make this change, is what the struggle is. Education is the process, but we're going to have to start it in the K through 12 step long before we get to the universities to do it. We can't wait till they're 20 years old. Like here I am at my age, and you know, when I saw the movie Hidden Figures, and I thought, wow, this is I was so amazed about what these women did with the most ridiculous circumstances. But here's what really bothered me the most. 60 years after they did this, 60 years that we're just learning about these amazing women and what they did. How in the hell, excuse my bad word for the day, I put my quarter in the box. How did we get there? How did we get to a point where what they did was written completely out of history, along with all the other things that people of color have done that have moved this country into where it is today? And that we've gotten complacent. There's apathy, not just amongst white folks, but also amongst Black folks too. We moved the bar forward in the 70s, and then people went, okay, we went from step A to step B, so now we can sit back and do nothing. And then what happened in those 30 or 40 years? They started pulling away from affirmative action programs, taking away from all the things that they had built up and worked for. And half of my students today have no context of the fact of what even their forefathers as Latinos fought to open the door for them to get education, and they don't even know anything about it. Nothing. No sense of identity about the people who came before them. Sure. That is incredibly frightening to me, that we as people of color don't know and don't care to know our history. And so this movement to me today seems so much more powerful, and I don't think it's going to end. I think this movement's going to continue. It doesn't seem to be slowing down, and I love the fact that it's inorganic. I love the fact that, yeah, it may be a little ugly and it may be a little bit, you know, uncomfortable for folks, but you know what? We tried the comfortable thing, and the comfortable thing didn't work. So I applaud to some degree, you know, and to a very strong degree, the process of change. Change doesn't come from just being apathetic. It comes from when people start ignoring you. This is what you have to do to get their attention. And it's unfortunate that we've lost some lives in that process, but those lives that were lost lead to long-term change, like what we're seeing in the South right now, challenging Mississippi to change their flag, you know, which hits them in their pocketbook. Unfortunately, the pocketbook is where it starts, but I'm okay with that. Hit them in the pocketbook. And with those things I see hope. Where I'm really upset is when you look at things like what happened in Kentucky, where they were able to keep all those Black folks out from voting by changing the process, and our federal government allows that to happen. I mean, it's just, it's mind-numbing that you could even get away with what they did in Kentucky in the 21st century, that we allowed that to happen. And let me say one last thing before I hand it over, because I think this is really important. Last night I was watching on ESPN, they had a whole thing on Australia and the Aborigines. And let me just tell you how I have tears, it just ripped my heart out. As far back as we have gone with our history, what they have done to Australia Day celebrates the day that they massacred the Aborigines. And they still revere it. And those folks there are fighting, those brothers and sisters there are fighting a fight like we're fighting here. And people still call them apes, still call them, it is just mind-numbing how around the world we have managed to allow, how people will justify their actions just as Captain Cook wrote in that there was nobody in Australia when he got there, when there were 60,000 Aborigines there, but he didn't see them as people. And it wasn't until less than 50 years ago that they were counted in the population. 50 years ago. You know, so 155 years, you know, I honestly, I can't even celebrate it, to be honest with you, because I'm so angry about the fact that even Juneteenth, because we've been still fighting that fight since Juneteenth. We're still fighting the same fight we fought 155 years ago, because just because they wrote it on paper did not make it real. And that's where we find ourselves today, because they didn't make it real, and Rutherford B. Hayes and the rest of them all the way down the line made sure that all the Jim Crow laws and all the things that were going to happen and lead to segregation, it was just institutionalized slavery. You couldn't own them anymore, but they were still stuck working for you, and they still got what they wanted for 150 years. So that's why we are where we are.
All right, great. Thank you very much, Professor Epps. I see that Becky has her hand up, and then we'll follow with Becky, with Mary McDevitt, and then Dave Fox for questions or comments.
Well, there's another group too that we need to think of as the Native Americans. You know, as far as when you talk about the Aborigines and Captain Cook, well, okay, Columbus didn't discover, you know.
No, he did not.
There's that. And then also when you talk about history and going back, and like in the 60s with the, you know, when we found out that the women, okay, you wonder how many women actually did a lot of the art and the music and all of these centuries back, and then the men took their, you know, yeah. So anyway, okay, that's all I wanted to say.
Okay. So then we'll switch over to Mary.
Yes, I think I'm unmuted now. Can anybody hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, just a little background. I'm a retired physician here in Sonoma, California, and very interested in doing a lot of work to try and foster Medicare for all. And I belong to the local Democratic Club. But I wanted to just mention something that is being talked about here in this area, which I think is important, and that's the concept of white privilege. And I think if you start to talk to people and get them to realize the things that they take for granted that represent white privilege that they've grown up with and never even thought about, it starts a whole new discussion. I know when I was young and out driving my car, I had a couple of instances when I was stopped by the police, and they were very helpful. Didn't even give me a ticket, just a warning. And, you know, that's evidence of white privilege. And the other thing that somebody told me about recently, and unfortunately I can't remember the name of the woman, maybe one of the professors knows about this, but if you go to YouTube and look up
Peggy McIntosh.
Is it the lady that has the blue-eyed, dark-eyed?
Oh no, that's Jane Elliott.
Yeah,
that's Jane Elliott.
Jane Elliott. Somebody told me about that, and I went to YouTube, and you can see the video of her doing an exercise with a college class, and really making people realize, if they're in the blue-eyed group, what white privilege really is. And I would recommend that anybody watch that video. So I just wanted to throw that out, as I know it's important to review history and all the sins of the past, but I think to get white people to realize how privileged they are is another avenue that can be very instrumental in leading a conversation to bring people along to that realization. So that's all I wanted to say. And unfortunately, I have to leave you all. I've enjoyed the session, but I have another Zoom meeting starting right now. So keep up the good work. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Dr. McDevitt. All right, and Dave Fox, unmute yourself.
You're still muted.
Unmute yourself, Dave. There you go.
I didn't know I was muted. Sorry about that. I've been involved in doing this for a while, but one of the things I want to point out that you were talking about how the Black Lives Matter, how you're going to broaden it out, but I think it organically it already has. if you look at some of the things that have taken place in the news, I saw a thing about a softball team where 11 of the 13 women quit the team because of something that the coach had tweeted, because what she had done was very, very insensitive, and they said, we're not going to deal with it. Guess what? Of them, only 2 of them were black. The rest of them were, they never said what their other colors were, whether they were brown, white, or whatever, but there were only 2 blacks on that team. So as a group, they decided that they needed to walk away from it. To me, that shows that it's broadening out.
That's why I think it's not going to go away, because it is broadening out. And even at Oklahoma State, Mike Gundy got in trouble, and people are stepping up and challenging some of these coaches who, and I mean, it's only through the vein of athletics, but even at pro level, there are people who are stepping up. It's always it's interesting how it's always reactionary, though, isn't it? That it's never like people innately do the right thing before it's a problem. It's like your car, when you hear the knock in your engine, if you just put $10 worth of oil in, you're good to go. But you think you can go a little further, and then all of a sudden it costs you a lot more money. Well, this is the same in social capital, if you would, right?
Can I address really quickly the issue about white privilege? One of the things about white privilege, I think we all have to understand that white privilege should not be understood or used in a sense to shame or guilt white folks, right? My white brothers and sisters shouldn't actually have to feel guilty about white privilege.
Yeah, exactly.
That is the way lives should be. So then the idea is the recognition of white privilege should be done in a context of, oh my goodness, what I consider to be everyday life where I shouldn't be afraid of police officers. I shouldn't have to worry about walking down certain streets. I could walk around with my hoodie on, right? Why isn't that actually the same for everybody? That's the recognition that we have to have, because so many of us, I think sometimes it's used in such a way where white folks are shamed or kind of, embarrassed by this or feel guilty about white privilege. No, we don't have time for that actually, right? The idea is, if in fact that's something that you enjoy, that you recognize that is something normal for you, then everybody else should also be able to have that. I just think that in that sense, we need to then actually engage in some principled ideas and commitment. David, I'm sorry.
Actually, Flores Bishop has their hand up.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. There's a lot to say about this topic. I'll tell you that for our family, what made an incredible difference was the play Hamilton. And so many of the issues that were raised then are still with us today. And one of the things that stood out was what they said about it matters who tells your story. And so I have a granddaughter who's in high school now. And so it's really prompted me to really be more aware of things. And so I've said to her, you should take all of the ethnic studies programs that you can, because the rest of it is written by and about white people. So if you want the other side of the story, you need to go to the ethnic studies department. So now I'm also in a book group, and there are 2 of us that are minorities, and the other 5 are not. And so what I've done is I've taken them by the hand and I've led them down the path, first gently and then not so gently. And the gently one was to couple 2 links. One of them was a statement of concern by the superintendent, I think in South Carolina, who said, you know, he had played by the rules all of his life. He lives in, he's a black superintendent. He lives in a majority white neighborhood. He takes his son everywhere when he goes around the neighborhood because he wants everybody in the neighborhood to see that this kid belongs. And that when his child is out walking, you know, nobody calls the police on him. So that was one thing. And then the second one is the woman who was trained through Jesse Jackson's push. And that I call rage. The first one, concern, the second is rage. And she's the one that just hits the nail on the head. You know, when the guy talks about looting and so forth, she said, you know what, nothing in this neighborhood belongs to us. We don't own anything. And that, I think, hits the nail on the head. Now, one of the members had chosen the next book called White Frailty. I think it's Frailty. But anyway, by Robin DiAngelo. And she withdrew it because the people checked and there were long waiting lists at the library for the book. And so she chose another book. And I started thinking about it and I thought, we need to read that book. And so what I said to her, and she concurred, and then I reached out to the other members. I haven't heard back yet. I said, this book is important for us to read because I watched the presentation that this author had made at the Seattle Public Library. And that was a link that I also sent to the book group members. But I guess what I'm saying is we need to respond and we need to keep the urgency going. Like I had heard that Fort Bragg, California was considering renaming its town because it's named for a Confederate officer. And I wrote to the mayor and the city council. And I encouraged them to change the name. There's a new cosmetic line that was going to be introduced online on Sephora's online platform on July 7th, which has been designated a no purchase day. And I sent them an email and made them aware of it. And I just got a response today saying, thank you very much. We're gonna bump this up to our leadership committee. So I think that that's the thing. We can't just take things lying down. We have to just bring whatever comes across our plate that illuminates things for us. We've got to make other people aware. And finally, the thing that I would like to share is that a good companion to that white fragility, it's fragility, not frailty, fragility, white fragility, is a talk that was presented by an ACLU lawyer about the real meaning of the Confederacy. And that's on YouTube. And those two things together are powerful.
Okay, good. No more hands up? Good.
Well, any comments on what she said?
She just unpacked a whole lot.
I know.
What
I was thinking.
And the part of the thing with the waiting list is because there's so many people who are suddenly becoming aware that there's a problem. Bookstores can't keep racism books in stock fast enough to get them to the people who didn't know that there was a problem.
Yes.
But I wanted to acknowledge that I don't know if you all remember Tamir Rice. I had his picture up a minute ago. He would have been class of 2020. So this would have been his year to graduate from high school, and he was 12 when he was shot.
Absolutely.
He was a little boy that looked like a little boy playing at a park, which is where little boys should be expected to play. And he was shot within seconds of the officer's arrival. So there's been a problem for a long time. And so I agree. What do we do now that's different? One thing we talked about when we had our pre-channel discussion is the fact that one advantage we see is that these young people are organizing leaderless groups, which means that no one can just cut off the head and stop them. But how do we support them and make sure that their work is effective? Becky, I see your hand.
Well, that's the thing I was just going to say. We've got to make sure that they've got the right support, and that it isn't just this group and that group every which way, and they might make some mistakes and so forth. And the problem isn't just the police. It is everywhere in society that we need to be doing something about it. So that's the thing too. And my philosophy has always been, we're all one people. We just have, some people just have better tans than others. Now, is that okay to think that? Because I feel like I've gotten, so I just really don't like the color of my skin. I don't get to have as pretty a tan, and I have to use all the horrible sunscreens and things,
But once you peel the skin away, the flesh beneath the skin
all the same.
Yeah.
And we have the same color of blood, and that's what I've always felt like in my life. And that's what I've always tried to teach people, and I taught school for 30 years and tried to teach that to kids. And that's the problem with this white privilege thing that I have felt so ashamed, like you say, ashamed of.
What's interesting.
I agree with Dr. Shea about this isn't something you should be ashamed of. What we call white privilege is actually a privilege that everyone should have.
Right. But I know that, if I'm in a store and they're checking receipts on your way out, I rarely ever get flagged to do that. I mean, everybody does at Costco, but I mean at Walmart or someplace. And I go, I just want to say, wait a minute, you'd better check mine too. But,
Right, but I think we can do that though. I think there are ways that we might be just gently again, maybe like Flores, I think it might have been Flores who said that, but to say, why are you not checking me, or why are you checking them? Can you make sure if it's a consistent thing that you're doing it for everybody?
Right.
I think we do need to speak up. And I think even if it's a small thing, right, I think we do need to bear witness.
Right.
And of course that could get tiring, of course, right?
Right.
But I think those are some of the things that we need to do.
Yeah.
I saw a meme today. It said, if you're tired of talking about racism, imagine what it's like for people experiencing it.
Exactly. And part of, I think why, in some ways, I think I agree with, Professor Epps, that it is gonna go on. I think and I think David also said that too, that it will continue, is I think a lot of people, while we're tired to a certain degree, I think there are a lot of people who are saying, I'm just not tired enough yet. I'm not tired enough. We can't be tired enough, right? Because this has gone on too long, for so long, it really is a situation where we cannot be tired enough, right? And of course, I know when I say that, it's still not unfair, especially to a lot of my minority brothers and sisters and women and, my LGBTQ community members, right? Because gosh, are we asking them to bear the brunt again, right? And I think that's why I led off with saying all of us need to really understand this as a thing of solidarity, not as a helper, right? We don't need to engage in charity, right? I need you not in front of me, like they would say, right? Because I may not follow you. Don't walk behind me because I may not lead. I want you right next to me. You got to be right next to me so that we could walk this together, right? David, I think you have your hands up.
Okay, Dave Fox.
One of the things, I think one reason why I don't think a lot of people are going to get tired is most of the people that are out doing this are people that are in high school, in college, in their 20s. For a lot of them, this is not something that they think of as just going to be a passing phase. And on top of that, with the internet, they encourage each other. They don't get a lack of support, because all they do is just get on Facebook, and there's out there people saying yes. People on Twitter that are saying, yes, you're doing the right thing. So I think this is something that has a potential to really change how we look at the world.
Yeah, look at what they did to the Trump rally in Oklahoma.
Yeah.
Yes, that was amazing, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Wow.
If you subtract all the people who were paid to be there, there were only about 1,500 people in attendance.
Yes.
Yeah. You know, I just wanted to add, you know, Becky, what you said, what I thought was really important. You know, there are some times here where, you know, we have to be able to, you know, look at this situation. We have to support those people, those kids who are out there. And I think one of the ways we support them is that we know they have the vigor and energy. We know they're upset about what happened with the killings. But now it's time for us to build another foundation for them, which is now, okay, now we know you're out here because you're saying we matter, but if I asked you who, like, for example, who is Alexander Dumas? You know, who are these people? Do you really know anything about the context? And of course, most of them don't. Even our young Black brothers and sisters don't know, right? So the idea is then, okay, let me help build a base so you understand what you're fighting for, what you're fighting about. And it's also drawing the connection that it is not just about you. You know, when I say you, I mean as a people. Like when I try to tell my students this all the time, well, you know, when we're looking at other people who don't look like you, that you have to understand that it's not just about you, that it's about all of us. And if we can make that connection, that's why I said, and we talked today, Lawanda, that we talked about the idea, and I said to you, I said, Black Lives Matter is the catalyst for change. But the next step in that is to remind ourselves that all lives matter, so that we could connect the dots with our brown brothers and sisters, our Asian brothers and sisters, our women, our LGBTQ communities, so that that's where the real institutional change will come from. If we polarize ourselves, what happens? We go back into our own, when the dust settles, right? What do we do? Like was what happened before. And we go back in our silos, and the Black silo is here. And even if we call it, and you know, it's interesting, we would call it, even if we had, you know, the white privilege, and say we had Black privilege and brown privilege, but they'd be in their own silos trying to hold on to their own privilege, as opposed to connecting themselves and saying, hey, if I make it, we all make it, and we can all enjoy a little privilege. And so I don't want to see us become too marginalized or too one-dimensional. I think that's a danger that we have to not let ourselves fall into. And becoming complacent. So those are the two things I think we really have to push the bar forward. I think these kids are now getting their first taste of the civil rights movement. I think we're headed toward a new civil rights movement, and I think it could be a very powerful movement if they will listen a little bit to some of our history and legacy, and not just sometimes look at us and say, you guys screwed it all up, you know, now it's ours to fix. I hope they'll find a way to listen to us a little bit. And for those of us who lived through some of the previous movements, you know, that I hope that they will do that. So my fingers are crossed.
Late 80s, early 90s, we were looking at the older people saying that they had screwed it up. Now I'm the older people. and Dr. Shea made some really good points when we were talking about parallel movements all over the world, where different people were dealing with being oppressed in their societies. And I think one of the tools, and this is an old tool that I've seen used a few times, was teach-ins. Because I think teaching the history of movements and getting an understanding of what happened, what were the motivating factors, what were the wins, and you know where did it stop, and what were the lessons that can be learned from them, and done in a way that respects them. When I have children now, they're in their 30s. Well, my daughter's in her 30s, my son's in his 20s. But one of their peers actually pointed something out to me one day, because he asked me how the kids are doing. I'm like, they don't want to hear anything I have to say. And he said, yeah, because they're adults now and you're still talking to them like they're kids. He said, if you want to have a relationship with them, even though you're their mother, you have to remember that they're adults. They have their own ideas, their own opinions, and they might know something that you don't know. And maybe if we approach our young people in that way, we can build some of those bridges. I saw Becky and Dave with their hands up.
And actually, I'm going to go first to Flores Bishop because she had her hand up first.
Okay.
And then Becky and then myself.
Okay, I just want to put a thought out. I like this organic feel to the spontaneous demonstrations. I like that they are to an extent decentralized, because if there's something that I've learned from my lifetime is that the leaders get killed off.
Mm-hmm.
And then what happens is everything comes to a standstill. So I like this spontaneous energy.
Becky, unmute yourself.
All right. I don't have an electronic hand, so that's what I was typing. Anyway, what I was going to say is I was lucky enough when I was teaching, I happened to be teaching kindergartners when Obama was inaugurated. And so anyway, I had been, teaching, the Martin Luther King holiday had just been before the inauguration. So I'd been teaching about that and about the civil rights and so forth, and, bring it down to their level and everything. And then, of course, his inauguration, I had those kindergartners sitting there watching the inauguration, the whole thing, and I was explaining to them how this was such a great thing in our country, and I was just so proud of this, and they were understanding the whole thing, and then just spellbound about the whole thing, and just so excited about it. And he was such a leader for them, and everything, and it really made them realize how far we had come in this country, I thought, and so forth. And then, of course, when the next one was inaugurated, I didn't even watch it. But anyway, but that was such a neat thing, for them to see and be a part of. And of course, I taught on the west side of Chula Vista down the south, and so I had every nationality. It was a small world sort of a thing, but that was the way I taught. And so those kids, they sat there the whole time. They were just fascinated by the thing, and it was just really great. And so that's what they thought of it.
All right, thank you, Becky. I kind of count myself really blessed in that I was raised in Colorado through the start of high school. And so I had a lot of liberal teaching. I took classes in civics, which I guess they don't teach anymore. So nobody understands what your rights are. They don't understand any of the stuff that we all here appreciate and know should be going on. I had teachers that in 6th grade, I did Brown Eyes, Blue Eyes, all the way back, in 1969. I saw Martin Luther shot, I saw Kennedy shot, I saw both Kennedy shot. I saw George McGovern shot. I saw a lot of change happening violently, and I remember watching the Olympics and seeing, people who I considered my heroes in track and field stand there with their hands raised in the air, and saying, "Hey, that may be the anthem for the United States, but it doesn't. The United States doesn't recognize me." And I watched Cassius Clay make his transformation to Muhammad Ali, and I had a lot of people explaining to me why these were very important events. Read Rachel Carlson's Silent Spring. I got signatures while I was in the Army at Fort Hood for the ERA on petitions in Texas. And we've been fighting this fight for a long time, and there's there's a wealth of good institutional knowledge amongst us that we have that we want to share. That, you know, and it's like I personally don't want to lead. I want to facilitate. I want to encourage everybody to and lift everyone else up, you know, alongside me, so that we walk together, and not I don't want to be a leader. I don't want to be a follower. So, Rick.
You know, it's interesting. I was thinking about a couple of things. One is for my students, I try to challenge them I teach almost like political history, because they have to understand the seeds of everything that have happened were usually as a result of the unresolved issues from the previous iteration. So I walk them through history a little bit. And one of the things I show them is that there's a really great PBS series that was done, actually with a 3-part on Race, the Power of an Illusion. And I highly recommend it for those, if you haven't seen it. It's very interesting because they take a group of high school kids and they run their mitochondrial DNA, which is your mother's 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 DNA. And they had, of course, black kids, brown kids, you know, Asian kids, white kids, et cetera. And of course, the black kids thought they would be more closely linked, and the Asians and the Latinos would be more closely linked. Well, when they ran their DNA, that's not what happened. And it's so interesting because, you know, only 3% of our DNA really separates anybody, you know, around the world. And yet the people who don't look like you may be closer to you than the people who do look like you. And the students were just blown away by that. They were shocked to see that or understand that it's such, you know, the external part of who we are is we pay so much attention to it, but it really, we've made it define the very essence of who we are. And I think, you know, sometimes people like the scientific inquiry, and I found that by showing, I don't show them all 3 parts, but I show them the first part, and they're always very surprised to find out that they may be closer to the people who maybe don't look like them, and that penguins are further apart in the DNA chain than humans are. So it's a very interesting notion how that plays out. But the educational aspect, I think, is really where the platform where we can do this, if we phrase it right. The other thing I want to say has to do with on the political side of things, which we haven't really talked a lot about. I think we have to be, you know, even as Democrats and as progressives, you know, sometimes the Democrats have a long history of not knowing how to play this game in terms of, you know, they never address the issues of, like, you know, when you say progressive, what does it mean to be progressive? Because it's, you know, every time you use a word or a phrase, it carries a certain connotation. And what I hope that we can do is also raise the level of understanding of what it means to be a progressive in society, so that people don't base it on their ignorance of what it means to be progressive, or what it means to be a Democrat, or what it means to be a liberal, or what it means when you say democratic socialist. You know, that people have to learn to be unafraid of words. And so when they say, oh, we're going to be socialist, and, you know, say, okay, well, wait a minute. Do you realize that socialism comes from the book of Deuteronomy in the Bible? You know, that it's about people helping one another, that it really isn't about Venezuela. But see, we don't teach people that. We teach them that, oh, that you're talking about communist China or Russia or someplace, and where they say they're that, but they're not that. So I think the Democrats have to do a much better job of changing the dialogue, because they're letting the Republicans carry that dialogue, and the Democrats are so dang silent. See, I said dang, not damn. So dang silent on this issue that it drives me nuts. So they let the talking points be talked by the Republicans, and this is also what, you know, even under Obama, the same thing happened. You know, for he's tried to stay above the fray, but by not addressing it, it really, I think, in some ways hurt, because he tried to walk that fine line, especially in the role that he had to play, because he had no help from Congress. But I think we have to be able to have the courage to frame it. So we say, look, people, let's not be afraid of who we are, and let's tell you what it means to be who we are. We're not going to burn down the building if we take over, you know. And with the new young progressives like AOC in Congress, we should be supporting those people who are coming up behind us. They are the ones who are going to be the future, but we have to let people be unafraid of them, because they call themselves progressives. It's not a fait accompli to be a progressive, you know, but we have to make sure we let people know that.
Yeah, we have to stop telling young people it's not their turn yet.
Yeah, yeah.
The picture that I asked Dave to share was from the skaters for Black Lives Matter. So we talk about all these organic protests that happen. Um, this is from the San Diego protests, but they happened in Los Angeles, they happened in Chicago, they happened in Philadelphia, they happened all over the nation, and it was a very diverse group of young people who come together behind their love of skateboarding, but they collectively decided that they were tired. And I think as we look at technology and the way young people connect, we just have to, in some ways, get out of their way, in other ways, support them and make sure they're armed with the right information. One of the things that I teach is Afrofuturism. And the reason I teach that course is specifically because people are often able to talk about concrete problems and concepts much more freely in an abstract format. So I've been reading sci-fi since I was 8, and for the people that are challenged with this conversation, this is the opposite of an abstract conversation. We are saying things the way they are and calling them what they are. But I think one of the things that we do have to do is look at how to imagine a different world. As long as we can only, our imagination is limited by what we have seen and what we have experienced, we will only replicate what we have seen and what we have experienced. So if we want something different, we have to use our imaginations. And I know that seems really corny, but you know, a lot of people got scared when they started talking about reallocating funds and changing, you know, different organizations' support. But we have to, if we want something different, we have to be able to imagine it. And we also have to empower people who are able and willing to lead those changes. So we have moved into this place where scientists and intellectuals are demonized, and we've got to look at our strengths and go back to empowering those things. But also STEM education, it forces people in some ways to see things in black and white, because in most math and science problems, there's a right answer and there's a wrong answer. And so we reinforce the false binary assumption. If we want people to think about we need to go back to valuing the liberal arts and social sciences in the same way that we value math and computer science, because otherwise we'll have a bunch of people who think it's okay to do math and say, okay, well, these people don't matter because, you know, they don't have enough numbers, or they don't have enough money, or they haven't passed whatever exam they need to pass. But our young people, I asked for the sharing of that image because to me that shows a bunch of people who don't know each other working together for a common cause and being able to say, okay, this is what's important today. The whole Black Lives Matter, all lives matter. I'm sure you've all heard the metaphor of the house on fire. And we're saying this house is on fire, let's put this fire out. And that's not to say these other houses don't matter. And yeah, I'm enjoying this conversation and the level of engagement of everyone. And I hope that when we walk away, we don't stop at, you know, that was a great chat.
Okay. Dr. Che?
Yes. So let me, you know what, thank you for saying all those things, Dr. Richmond. One of the things that I wanted to actually just jump off of was, you know, I'm so happy that you mentioned the issue of binary logic, because it is so true, right? We learn the alphabet to read and write and so on. But we've actually been socialized to analyze our world through binary logic, right? So then it becomes very easy, black, white, zero-sum game, right? In-group, out-group. It is absolutely one of the mechanisms of the ideology that these people use to be able to divide all of us, right? Because the idea is, are you a man or a woman? All of a sudden you have that division, right? Are you straight or gay? All of a sudden you have that division, right? So this idea of binary logic that Dr. Richmond brought up, I think is absolutely crucial in our educational institutions, right? So if we're talking about curriculum, something really tangible, how do we change our curriculum, right? I mean, isn't it amazing that we have majors up the wazoo? You could major in anything you want, except for something that is really central to our lives, and that is, there's no major called democracy. How do you know if your democratic rights have been violated if you don't even know what that is? Isn't it amazing, something so complex as democracy, nobody learns about systematically. I want people to take Democracy 101, 255, 357, 675 at the graduate level. They have that for everything except for democracy. By the way, I don't think that's a coincidence. Harvard doesn't offer it as much as San Diego State doesn't offer it. It is across the entire country. And that is another way of holding on to the veil, the ideology, that divides all of us. That's it for me.
Let me tap into you real quickly for 1 second. It's interesting because I'm in the Imperial Valley, which I said before is 95% Hispanic. We do not have, and we have a Chicano, we have a Latino woman president. The previous president was a Latino male. We do not have a Chicano studies program, even though we are 95% Hispanic.
Yeah.
I'm mortified to think that how do these kids learn to have any identity about who they are as young Hispanics when there's no one teaching them, and it's completely left out for them because most of the board of our school is white, and they're from the Brawley area, which are from upper white farmers, and so it's been institutionalized for those people to be marginalized at this level, even though they're 95% of the population. As a matter of fact, we have a faculty member whose name I will not mention, who is a racist and has told my students and directly that they don't belong here. And we drug him to the board, and the board, they just laughed. And yeah, they slapped him on the wrist like a half dozen times, but he is still there and still able to spew his ugliness to Hispanic students when he does not like Hispanic people. It is the most mind-boggling thing. But this is one of those, talking about moving the bar forward. Again, even amongst people within our own groups, we have to make sure they don't impede us as well, like the Ward Connerlys of the world, or the Clarence Thomases of the world, who just because, and it's interesting because you'll have people who put, and I'll say this real quick before, and then I'll get Becky take over. I have been mortified over the last couple of weeks at the number of Black folks they have put up front and center, and a lot of my white friends, will send me little links and say, look at what this Black person said about what they think about Floyd, right? And go, oh, as if that one Black person spoke for all the Black people. And then you read about this person and, they're, young, yuppie, socialized in, some upstate place away from Black folks. And then somehow they're supposed to be the icon for good Black people because they're not raised in hell. And that's sort of the symbolism of what some of my progressive white friends look at and go, well, if that person thinks that, what's wrong with the Black? What's wrong with the rest of you? It's interesting how there's a lot of them out there now, and then Trump uses them. A lot of politicians go get that one Black person and say, or that one brown person or that one Asian person, and they go, aha, that's why, they don't think the way the rest of you think, and they become the icon for the opposite of what we're trying to achieve.
Yeah, the young people and the college students call that respectability politics.
Yeah.
And basically we're, in many ways, we still are creating factories of assimilation where we are teaching non-white students to get as close to white as they can if they want to be successful.
Okay, real quick, we're going to go Joan and then Becky.
I'm a retired librarian, and one of the books that won an award this year, can't remember the title at the moment, sorry, was kind of on this general subject. It was a young girl who was the darkest member of her African American family. And she felt that she was ugly because of the color of her skin. It's not just white privilege. It's a mentality that goes throughout society.
Mm-hmm.
And another thing that I feel is missing in our children's education is history. I don't teach history. I teach social studies. I personally cannot define social studies. I know what history is. Never mind the sexist title. History is a story of us. That's what it means. And that should include things like what a democracy is, what capitalism is, that the two are not synonymous, etc. So there's a lot that isn't being taught. And I think that it's a fundamental thing that does need to change. Earlier in the conversation, there was mention about the ethnic studies class. I don't know how many people here know that Jews are opposed to that specific curriculum that's been proposed. Why? There's no mention of Jews. Jews are often thought of as privileged. You know, our Jews are rich, etc. We don't stick out like our African American, our Latinx people, and so on. But there's more than a couple of minorities around. We need to somehow teach about all of these people, which can be done with history or other mechanisms, because every group has a good people, a terrible people, and a way of looking at the world that can enlarge all of our thoughts. Okay.
All right, Becky.
Thank you.
I was going back to Rick's comments about his colleague. Of course, it just astounded me. And then also down in the Imperial Valley, isn't there an Asian population down there too? And that's not being, doesn't sound like they don't have any representatives down there either.
No, they don't. It's been pushed way to the side. The small Black contingency as well as the Asian populations have all been sort of marginalized in a region that has been pretty much, even though it's predominantly Hispanic, is dominated by a small white minority of people who are farmers who control the money and the economics of the region. And that's the way it operates. And even at the upper echelons of our institution, it's, you know, this whole Black Lives Matter thing. It's funny, the chancellor of the California Community College system, we had a meeting just a couple of weeks ago, and he challenged the presidents of the colleges and the administrations to step it up, you know. And at that time, our president finally sort of sheepishly reached out to me and asked me how I was feeling, and I was, you know, if I was okay. And I was like, interesting, you check on me a week and a half after the events, right? And then she asked me to draft a letter to the board as well as to the college, and you know, and that she would sign on it. You know, she wanted me to write it, and I kept thinking, well, you're the president, why am I, you know? And supposedly supporting Black Lives Matter, right? And it took her another week and a half, and then she said it was on her list to do, but she hadn't gotten to it, you know. And I thought, so the few Black faculty and staff that we have on our campus, and the few Black students that we have, what do you think it says to them that you haven't bothered in 3 weeks at that point to open your mouth and say anything after you just said to them before that you care about them, but your words and your actions now seem disingenuous? Well, of course, right away, she immediately tried to put something together very quickly, took my letter and then sent it out. But it was interesting how, if I hadn't called to run it again, it would have just sat there and just, you know, so it's unfortunate. it was very angering and disheartening when people
Yeah.
look at you in your face and tell you that they care. But then again, like you mentioned, Dr. Richmond, how people will look at you and smile and do those things, but then do nothing, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's what
What a big disconnect.
that's the thing we have to change is people not,
Right.
we have to get uncomfortable and we have to say, okay, let's think about, think about it in this term. And this might be one of the most important points is that think about it in terms of legacy. Our generation is now moving on, right? We're all getting up there and I'm thankful the time I grew up in. I'm thankful for the things I got to see and the beauty and ugliness of all the civil rights movement and the women's movement and all those things that myself and my mother and father and my grandparents were involved in. My great-grandmother was at the Tulsa riots. So was my grandmother and my grandmother and her sister were there in the middle of the riots. So I feel so honored to be able to be here at this point. But I will tell you that I think that we have an opportunity here to take the next step by handing off this to the next generation. And if we, again, as I said earlier, if we do this right, we can leave a legacy for ourselves and say we didn't. We may not have done it perfectly, and we may have waited a little while, but we tried. And I think that's a very damn honorable place to be, that we collectively, not just Black folks, but not just brown folks, not just Asian folks, but that we tried to leave it a little better than we found it. And I think that's really the key for the next generation, that we show our effort to this end.
Okay, real quick, I know Maria had her hand up, so I'd like to give Maria a quick opportunity. And Dr. Shea, maybe I'll give you the last word to do the wrap up for the facilitators. So Maria first.
I was going to say my son-in-law works at a university, and it's a private university, and their president has done nothing also. And the staff all the faculty have gotten together and wrote a letter and wanted them to at least sign something and say something, and they didn't. In fact, they had 4 Hispanic students that the students go on this closed website that's for the school, and they actually kicked them out because they were supporting BLM. And it was like, the faculty's going, do you understand what you're doing? These students are now feeling like they are not supported. Well, they're not being supported, at least not by the president, but the faculty has rallied together and is taking matters into their own hand, basically. But the other thing is, people were bringing up about teaching history. Yeah, I agree with that. It has to be history and it has to be from the young ages. The problem that I see, though, is that history books have to go through this long, or textbooks in school have to go through this long process. And who's the ones deciding that long process? They're all, I don't know that it's racially mixed. It seems to me it's just all basically white older people, whether they're still old men or a combination thereof now, until that actually changes. And those people who are in charge of approving textbooks become a little more varied. I just don't see that happening. And I'm hoping it doesn't take another generation.
Okay, good. All right, Dr. Shea.
I think some of the things that I think Joan brought up and others, I think one of the ways so that we do not actually engage in different ethnic groups or women and so on, try to engage in, for lack of a better word, right, a pissing contest, right? Because I think if we actually were to understand a simple question, that is, has humanity been violated? If humanity has been violated, then I must stand up for my Jewish brothers and sisters. If humanity has been violated, I must stand up for my women sisters. And I have to stand up for my Black brothers and sisters and so on. So I think the idea is, did they violate only me because I'm Asian, the question should be, have they violated humanity, right? And the thing is, this is one of the reasons why I think our history in our country, of course, those powers that be, did so much to make sure that they propagate this false notion that not everybody's fully human, right? Yeah. Because how is it possible in a culture that is supposed to be the best, leading the world, right, engage in slavery? How is it possible in a civilization that is supposed to be the front runners engage in genocide of Native Americans? How they engage in interning Japanese Americans who are citizens, right? How do they engage in all of these kinds of things? They can't, but the only way they could do it is to be able to show, or at least propagate, that they were less than human beings, right? Because the math just doesn't add up if we were to actually treat everyone as human beings. So I think in that sense, and this is where the idea of solidarity really comes in, right? It's not just simply that the laws have to be democratized, it's the healthcare system and so on and so on and so forth. And this is where we go back to the very beginning with Dr. Richman and Dr. Epps, when they were saying, you know, yes, all lives do matter, right? Although at this point, right, the house that's on fire is not everybody's house, right? So we do have to recognize that, you know. So for me, I think the last thing is that we cannot continue to reform our country because our country was founded on the basic principles of exclusion, marginalization, and inequity. What we really need is transformation, right? And to that effect, you know, it's funny, you know, education comes from a Latin root word, educere. That literally means to pull someone out from darkness. Darkness of what? The proverbial ignorance. Because you know who thrives in ignorance? Racism, sexism, homophobia. So the idea was education was supposed to take us out of that darkness of ignorance. And instead, rather than educating, what we do is we school our children, right? So for me, would you mind if I end with a little Mayan greeting that I always start and end my classes with? It's a Mayan greeting called Inlake Alakin. And it's been translated into Spanish, but I'll do both Spanish and English. So it's a very short poem and it's very meaningful for me. It's the poem that I start my classes off every single semester and recite this again at the end of the semester as a farewell to my beloved students. Tú eres mi otro yo. You are my other me. Si te hago daño a ti, I do harm to you. Me hago daño a mí mismo. I do harm to myself. Si te amo y respeto, if I love and respect you, me amo y respeto yo. I love and respect myself. Tú eres mi otro yo. You are my other me. That's all I got, folks.
All right.
Please send that to me, would you? I love that.
Me too. Me too.
Yeah.
We'll send it to everybody on the thing, chat.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, great. We need to wrap up. We're at 8:53 and we're supposed to be done at 9. And I want to respect everybody's time. I want to throw up a few things on the screen share real quick. There's Dr. There's that. And then, this is something that I picked up from the from my friend Ann Barron, who's at the Peace Center, and this is how to build a 21-day to racial equity habit building challenge, and it's a whole program on how to change your habits. And I think Dr. Che will agree with me. I learned in sociology at San Diego State that you cannot remove an institution without replacing it with another one. And we just never totally replaced the institution of slavery. We just reformed it. to a more convenient form that was more allowable within society. So we need to, if we take this 21-day racial equity habit building challenge, and it's just being cognitive of what you're doing, what you're saying, and spending an hour every day doing something, thinking, meditating, reading, talking to somebody about racial equity. And you can change your whole concept, and you can learn how to share your privilege with everyone else, whether you're white, black, brown, LGBTQ, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You can share your whatever privilege you have, and so that people will have an understanding of who you are and what you're about, and move forward. We're talking about education, and there's a whole bunch of books about what they didn't teach you in American history class, lies that my teacher told me. I read 2 books, and I think it was the Lowen books, the 2 versions of his book, and it started with the lie about Hispaniola and how it was a genocide of all the natives on Hispaniola, and that's why there's not one native on Hispaniola. They were all imported from Africa. Black Like Me, wonderful book that shows how somebody went out and tried to learn how it was for their fellow man to get by. And then James Baldwin, I've read a lot of his work, and I love this guy, and I would encourage everybody. There's the Tulsa Race Massacre that everybody talks about, but there was the Rosewood Massacre also in Florida. And just a, very, very interesting things that, it's all, there's nothing new under the sun. It's all been happening over and over again. And we're just watching a slow massacre right now of people being gunned down in the street. And we got to end this. We just got to get rid of the fear, which causes all the evils that we're seeing, and get back to a consciousness of love, where we take care of each other like we take care of ourselves, which is that speech, or that prayer from Mayan that Dr. Shea read to us, and I loved it. So again, I'm going to put a call out. Please like us on Facebook. We'd like you to continue to participate with us. We need you to participate with us. We are just an extension of you, and we are all servants here of our brothers and sisters, friends and neighbors. So I'd like to promote that concept. With that, I know we should give a couple moments for Luana and Rob to talk about their campaigns. And also Michelle Krug probably wants to talk about what she's got going on. So I will yield 1 minute each to each of you.
Rob, you want to go first? They've heard from me a lot.
Are you there, Rob? Mr. Howard?
Got it?
There you go. Now you're in.
All right. Took a minute. No, I want to just, for those who don't know, Rob Howard, running for mayor of Oceanside, just checking in with a number of the clubs and why it's important to get around the county. And that's what we're doing. So thank you for the time.
Thank you. You honor us. All right, Michelle.
Had to hit the unmute. Mute is a powerful tool. Everybody, Rob Howard.
Go ahead, Michelle. Do you have anything you wanted to say? Michelle? Ms. Krug? Unmute. There you go.
Unmute.
Unmute yourself, Michelle. If you want to have something to say to the group.
Try it again. You double clicked.
One more time.
All right.
There you go. Go ahead.
Michelle?
Oh, boy. Why is this doing that? Okay.
Here we go. Oh.
I think I'm going to.
All right, Michelle.
At this meeting.
Say something now.
Is this the one with Dave?
Yeah.
You sent me the link too. So.
Yeah, I just unmuted myself, but I haven't put the picture back on. There's a little note.
Where is the email?
It's 150 reminder, 150 of slavery, 150 years of slavery. That's what it is.
Oh, I thought that's the one he's doing.
Yep.
Okay.
Actually, there's going to be a recording of it to watch later, so I'll look forward to it later.
You know what? Send me that, because honestly, I'm burned out.
Yeah, I'll send it to you.
Okay, let me.
So I'll say.
You're going, Luana.
All right, so I'll just say that my last word, I mean, you all know that I'm running for school board and you know a little bit about me. On Sunday, I'm hosting Self-Care Sunday for my campaign, where I'm trying to give back to everyone for coming to help support my campaign so I can do voter engagement. It's a sound bath and guided meditation where one of my girlfriends who's a certified yoga practitioner will be leading us through a meditation where she'll be playing singing bowls, wind chimes, ocean drums, rain sticks, and other sacred instruments to help us have a moment of reprieve and retreat. I know that for me, when I actually take some time to meditate, it's a little hard when there's a lot going on, and having a guided meditation really helps. The benefits are enhanced immune system, of course, some optimism, some relaxation, and honestly, I usually feel pretty refreshed afterwards. So I encourage you all to come. I put the link in the chat, and I think that we all deserve it, because this is not just difficult for me. This time between the pandemic and all this racial unrest, I know that we're all feeling it. So I encourage you to come. All you have to do is turn on your computer, log into the Zoom, put on something comfortable, lay back and relax, close your eyes and listen.
Sweet. All right, Mike, last word for PDA-CA.
Actually, I have nothing to add. I am just thrilled. This was more than I had hoped for, to hear a different point of view. Watch your email. We'll send you a link to the video of this. We'll also send you the chat of this. And
see that they're going to send the email and chat.
I hope to see you next month.
All right, yay.
All right.
Thank you so much.
Any last words?
Thank you so much. It's been just really appreciated the time and the energy. So thank you.
Right.
Thank you.
Namaste, everybody. I wish you well. I wish you good health. Anybody wants to hang out and chat, we'll leave this on for a couple more seconds, but we're going to probably turn off the recording now. And you can say bye-bye.